At a tech conference in Silicon Valley, the CEO of Horizon Tech called my inventory management system charmingly obsolete in front of 500 industry leaders, and they all laughed like I was some kind of digital dinosaur. What none of them knew was that for 3 years, I'd been quietly building the most robust supply chain solution in the industry. So when the global systems crash happened 6 months later and his company was hemorrhaging millions per hour, guess who got the desperate midnight call? That's when he realized I wasn't obsolete. I was essential. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The conference hall gleamed with that particular shine that only comes from too much money and too little imagination. Glass walls stretched toward the ceiling, framing the San Francisco Bay like an expensive postcard. Tech executives in identical outfits of casual luxury moved between standing cocktail tables, trading elevator pitches and false humility like they were Pokémon cards. I adjusted my name badge, feeling the slight warp in the laminate where it had been printed incorrectly. Maya Johnson had somehow become Maya Johnston, a small error, but one that felt symbolic of how invisible I was in this space. My simple charcoal pantsuit felt wrong among the designer tech casual wear that dominated the room, but I hadn't come to blend in. I'd come to pitch. My presentation slot was scheduled for 2:15 p.m., a dead zone after lunch when everyone would be checking emails or fighting the urge to nap. Perfect for a session titled Legacy Systems Integration for Modern Supply Chains, not exactly the headline grabber in a conference featuring panels on quantum computing and neural interfaces. I made my way toward the presentation room, passing groups of people whose conversations automatically quieted when I walked by, as if I was a disruption to the carefully cultivated atmosphere of innovation. I checked my watch, still 40 minutes before my session. Enough time to check my slides one more time, to make sure every calculation was perfect, every case study bulletproof. That's when I heard him. Victor Reynolds, CEO of Horizon Tech, the golden boy of enterprise software, whose company had gone public last year in the biggest tech IPO since Facebook. His voice carried across the atrium, that particular timbre of entitlement that cuts through ambient noise without trying. The problem with these dinosaur systems, he was saying to a circle of nodding executives, is that they're built by people who can't imagine the future. They solve yesterday's problems with the day before's technology. Laughter rippled through his audience. Someone lifted a glass in agreement. I wouldn't have thought he was talking about me, except his eyes flickered in my direction, just for a second, just long enough for me to know this wasn't coincidence. We'd met before, 3 years ago, when I'd pitched my inventory management system to Horizon Tech. He declined with a polite email, citing strategic direction incompatibilities, whatever that meant. I kept walking, pretending I hadn't heard, but my face burned. My system wasn't flashy or built on the latest trendy framework. It was solid. It worked. It had saved my previous employer millions when their supply chain threatened to collapse during the pandemic. But it wasn't sexy, and in Silicon Valley, sexy trumped functional every time. My presentation room was small, tucked at the back of the convention center. While the keynote addresses got ballrooms with stadium seating, my session was allocated to what amounted to a glorified conference room. The chairs were arranged in neat rows, enough to seat maybe 60 people. I would be lucky if 20 showed up. I connected my laptop to the projector, pulled up my slides, and watched as my 3 years of work projected onto the screen. Clean, minimal design. No fancy animations or gradient backgrounds. Just data, solutions, and results. The door opened behind me. I turned, expecting the AV technician or maybe an early attendee. It was Victor Reynolds. He stood in the doorway, tall and lean in that way that spoke of expensive personal trainers, his perfectly trimmed beard framing a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He wore a midnight blue Brioni suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, the jacket casually unbuttoned as if to signal he wasn't trying too hard. Maya Johnston, right? He said, deliberately using the incorrect version from my badge. Johnson, I corrected, trying to keep my voice even. Right, sorry about that. He didn't sound sorry at all. I saw your name on the program and thought I'd stop by. Inventory management systems are something of a passion of mine. That was a lie. Horizon Tech had built its reputation on consumer-facing products, sleek interfaces that looked good in advertisements but collapsed under real-world conditions. They'd tried to enter the enterprise space last year with their Horizon Enterprise Suite, which had been plagued with scaling issues from day one. I'm flattered, I said, because what else could I say? He was Victor Reynolds. His company was worth billions, at least on paper. Mine was worth whatever was in my checking account. He walked to the front row, took a seat directly in front of the podium where I would be standing. Don't mind me, he said, pulling out his phone. I'm just curious to see what you've built. I remember your pitch from a few years back. My stomach tightened. Of course he was here to watch me fail. I was the antithesis of everything his company stood for: utilitarian over flashy, stable over cutting edge, practical over theoretical. In Silicon Valley's religion of disruption, I was a heretic. Over the next 15 minutes, people began filtering into the room. Not many, maybe 25 total, but more than I had expected. I recognized a few faces: procurement officers from manufacturing companies, logistics managers from retail chains. The people who actually had to make things work, not just look good in pitch decks. And then, just as I was about to begin, the door opened again and a group of 6 people entered. They all wore Horizon Tech employee badges. They spread out across the back row, laptops open. One caught my eye and smirked. They were here to watch their boss witness my humiliation. The room lights dimmed. The projector hummed. My title slide glowed against the wall: RevStock, Inventory Management for Real-World Conditions. I took a deep breath. 3 years of work. 3 years of late nights, of coding until my fingers cramped, of testing edge cases that no one else had thought of. 3 years of being told my approach was too conservative, too cautious, too boring. Thank you all for coming, I began. Today I'm going to show you a system that doesn't make promises it can't keep. It doesn't claim to revolutionize your business or disrupt your industry. What it does is work. Every time, under any conditions. With or without internet connectivity, regardless of scale. In the front row, Victor Reynolds raised an eyebrow, already skeptical. I walked through my presentation methodically. I showed case studies from my pilot customers, small to mid-sized. Manufacturers who had implemented RevStock and seen their inventory shrinkage drop by 26% on average. I demonstrated how the system could function during network outages, maintaining local databases that synced when connections restored. I explained how it integrated with legacy systems that many companies were still using because replacing them would cost millions. Throughout, Victor typed on his phone, occasionally smirking or shaking his head slightly. His team in the back took notes, sometimes exchanging glances or suppressed laughs. I was nearly finished when Victor raised his hand. Technically, I had said I would take questions at the end, but he was Victor Reynolds. The rules were different. For him. Yes? I said, pausing my presentation. This is all very. He paused, as if searching for a polite word: thorough. But I'm curious why you've chosen to build on such outdated architecture. Wouldn't a cloud-native solution be more scalable? More future-proof? The way he emphasized future-proof made it clear what he thought of my system, that it was a relic, designed for a world that no longer existed. RevStock can deploy to cloud environments, I answered carefully. But it's designed to function in hybrid scenarios where connectivity isn't guaranteed. Manufacturing floors, warehouses, remote locations, these aren't places where you can count on perfect network conditions. He nodded slowly, a teacher acknowledging a student's effort but not quite convinced. But don't you think that approach is a bit cautious? The future of enterprise is fully connected. The Internet of Things, edge computing, these are solving the problems you're describing. A few heads nodded in the audience. Of course they did. This was the gospel according to Silicon Valley: everything would be connected, all the time, everywhere. Never mind that it wasn't the reality for most businesses outside the tech bubble. The future is always coming, I said, but businesses need to operate in the present. RevStock bridges that gap. Victor smiled, not unkindly but with a certainty. That made my skin crawl. That's a charming perspective. Almost nostalgic. Like preferring vinyl records to streaming services. Laughter rippled through the room. Not everyone, the procurement officers and logistics managers stayed quiet. But enough. Enough to make me feel small, outdated, irrelevant. Thank you for your question, I said, and returned to my presentation. But the damage was done. The energy had shifted. I was no longer a presenter with valuable information, I was a curiosity. A throwback, someone who didn't get it. I finished my slides, thanked everyone for their time, and opened the floor for questions. There were a few, mostly technical ones from the people who actually worked in inventory management. I answered them as best I could, but I was distracted by Victor, still sitting in the front row, still typing on his phone, occasionally smiling to himself as if enjoying a private joke. When the session ended, people filed out quickly. No one approached me to exchange contact information or request a demo. The Horizon Tech employees left as a group, already engaged in animated conversation, laughing about something, probably me. Victor was the last to leave. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and approached the podium where I was disconnecting my laptop. Interesting presentation, he said, in a tone that suggested the opposite. Thank you for attending, I replied, focusing on wrapping my power cord rather than meeting his eyes. You know, he said, leaning against the podium, invading my space slightly, I admire your dedication. There's something almost heroic about championing these legacy approaches. Like those people who still know how to make horseshoes or repair typewriters. I looked up at him then, unable to hide my frustration. RevStock isn't a historical reenactment. It's a practical solution for real businesses that can't afford to gamble on promises of perfect connectivity. His smile widened. Maya, the companies that can't adapt will die. That's the nature of progress. Horizon's enterprise suite is designed for where the world is going, not where it's been. And how's that working out? I couldn't help myself. I heard your Australian rollout had some issues last month. A flash of irritation crossed his face. The Australian rollout had been a disaster. A major retail chain had implemented Horizon's system and experienced 3 days of complete inventory chaos when the cloud connection failed during a weather event. Growing pains, he said dismissively. That's what happens when you're pushing boundaries. Sometimes you have to break things to make them better. Tell that to the businesses losing money while you figure it out. He straightened, his casual demeanor hardening slightly. Well, I wish you luck with your... He gestured vaguely at my laptop, approach. There's probably a niche market for it. Small businesses, developing regions, that sort of thing. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the room that suddenly felt too big and too empty. I packed up my things slowly, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. This was why I hated these conferences. They weren't about solving real problems, they were about who could tell the most convincing story about the future. And in that game, I would always lose to people like Victor Reynolds. As I headed for the exit, my phone buzzed with an email notification. Probably spam, or maybe the conference organizers with a feedback survey. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. It was from Patricia Winters, Chief Operations Officer at GlobalMart, the third largest retail chain in North America. The subject line read simply, "Interested in RevStock demo." I stopped walking, read the email twice to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Ms. Johnson, I attended your session today and was impressed by your practical approach to inventory management. GlobalMart is experiencing significant challenges with our current system, particularly in rural locations with limited connectivity. I would like to arrange a demonstration of RevStock at your earliest convenience. Please contact my assistant to schedule. I looked up from my phone, scanning the now empty hallway as if Patricia Winters might still be there. She must have slipped out quietly, not wanting to approach me in person with Victor Reynolds hovering nearby. GlobalMart was a potential client I hadn't even dared to dream about. They had thousands of locations, millions in inventory, and the kind of complex supply chain that would truly showcase what RevStock could do. And they had reached out to me, not the other way around. I allowed myself a small smile as I walked toward the convention center exit. Maybe, just maybe, there were still people who valued substance over style, reliability over flash. Maybe I wasn't as obsolete as Victor Reynolds thought. The cool San Francisco air hit my face as I stepped outside. The sun was setting over the bay, painting the water in shades of orange and pink. Tech workers streamed past me, heading to networking events and sponsored parties where they would continue to convince each other that they were building the future. I pulled out my phone again, reread Patricia's email, and typed a quick, professional response. As I hit send, I felt something shift inside me, not quite vindication, not yet, but a quiet certainty that I was on the right path, even if it wasn't the one lit with venture capital and media attention. 6 months later, I was in my apartment/office. In Oakland, 3 monitors displaying different parts of RevStock's codebase, debugging a minor issue with the barcode scanner integration. It was nearly midnight, but I had promised the feature by morning, and I kept my promises. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Telemarketers sometimes called late, hoping to catch people off guard, but something made me answer. Is this Maya Johnson? The voice was male, stressed, unfamiliar. Yes, who's calling? This is James Teller, CTO at Horizon Tech. He spoke quickly, words tumbling over each other. We have a situation. A major situation. Our enterprise suite is down globally. Complete system failure. I sat up straighter, fingers still hovering over my keyboard. I'm sorry to hear that. But why are you calling me? A pause, then, Victor gave me your number. Said you might be able to help. Victor Reynolds had given my number to his CTO? The same Victor who had compared my system to horseshoes and typewriters? What kind of help are you looking for exactly? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. James exhaled heavily. We need a backup system. Something that can keep our clients operational while we fix this mess. Their inventory systems are completely offline. They can't ship, can't receive, can't even tell what they have in stock. We're talking millions in losses per hour. I closed my eyes, trying to process what I was hearing. Horizon Tech, the darling of enterprise software, was having a complete system meltdown, and they were calling me, the dinosaur, the vinyl record enthusiast, for help. How long has the system been down? I asked. Almost 8 hours. We've tried everything. Rollbacks, hot fixes, parallel deployments. Nothing's working. The database is corrupted at the source, and it's replicated across all our clusters. 8 hours of downtime for a global enterprise system was beyond catastrophic. It was the kind of failure that ended companies, that destroyed careers, that became business school case studies of what not to do. And what makes you think Revstock can help? I couldn't help the slight edge in my voice. It's built on such outdated architecture, after all. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Look, I know Victor can be Victor. But right now we need something that works. Your presentation at Tech Forward, the offline capabilities, the local database fallbacks, that's exactly what we need right now. Our clients need. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the code on my screens. Revstock wasn't perfect, but it was stable. It was designed exactly for this scenario, when the shiny, cloud-based systems failed and businesses still needed to function. It's not a simple plug-and-play solution, I said. It would need to be configured for each client's specific inventory structure. We'll provide whatever resources you need. Whatever it costs. Just tell me you can help us. I thought about declining. About telling James that they should have thought about these failure scenarios before building a house of cards and selling it as a skyscraper. About suggesting they call someone who was more future-proof. But that wasn't who I was. I built systems that helped businesses function, that solved real problems for real people. And right now, those people needed help. Send me the client schemas and access to their inventory databases, I said. I'll see what I can do. The relief in James's voice was palpable. Thank you. I'll have everything sent over immediately. And Maya? Yes? Victor wants to talk to you directly. He's in crisis meetings right now, but he asked me to tell you that he'll call you himself in the morning. After I hung up, I sat in my darkened apartment, watching the lights of Oakland flicker outside my window. I should have felt vindicated, maybe even smug. The technological marvel that was Horizon's enterprise suite had collapsed under its own weight, while my charmingly obsolete system was about to save the day. But mostly I felt tired. Tired of the tech industry's relentless pursuit of the new at the expense of the reliable. Tired of watching businesses suffer because they'd been sold on visions rather than solutions. I turned back to my monitors, cracked my knuckles, and began preparing Revstock for the biggest deployment it had ever seen. There would be time for reflection later. Right now, there was work to do. The next 18 hours were a blur of code, configuration, and coffee. James sent over the client data as promised, 12 major enterprises that used Horizon's system, representing billions in inventory. I worked methodically, setting up Revstock instances for each, configuring them to recognize the existing data structures, building bridges between my system and theirs. It wasn't elegant. In some cases, I had to write crude conversion scripts to translate between data formats. In others, I had to simplify complex structures because there wasn't time for perfect solutions. But one by one, the Revstock instances came online, providing basic but functional inventory management for businesses that had been flying blind. I was testing the deployment for the last client, a pharmaceutical distributor with particularly complex requirements, when my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID displayed Victor Reynolds. I took a deep breath before answering. Hello, Victor. Maya. His voice sounded different, strained, humbled, human. I understand you've been working through the night. Yes. James tells me you've managed to get temporary systems running for most of our affected clients. 10 out of 12 so far, I confirmed. The pharmaceutical client is coming online now, and I'm still working on the automotive parts distributor. There was a pause, and I could almost hear him struggling with what to say next. Victor Reynolds, the tech wunderkind, the visionary CEO, was not accustomed to asking for help, let alone admitting he was wrong. I owe you an apology, he said finally. What I said at the conference, it was arrogant and short-sighted. Yes, it was. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. Another pause. I'd like to meet with you, once this crisis is contained, to discuss a more formal arrangement. What kind of arrangement? A partnership. Maybe more. Your system is doing what ours promised to do but couldn't. Our clients are noticing. I thought about all the late nights, the rejection letters from investors who thought Revstock wasn't exciting enough, the condescension from tech bros who couldn't understand why anyone would build for reliability over flashiness. "I'm listening," I said. "I'm prepared to offer you a significant consulting contract to help us rebuild Enterprise Suite with the kind of resilience you've built into RevStock. 7 figures, at least for the first year." I almost laughed. After all the dismissal, all the mockery, he was offering me money to fix his mistake. And if I'm not interested in helping you rebuild Horizon's reputation? Now it was his turn to be silent for a moment. "Then perhaps we could discuss an acquisition. RevStock is clearly addressing a market need that we've failed to meet." An acquisition. The holy grail for most tech startups. The validation that what you've built is valuable enough for someone else to pay millions for it. But an acquisition would mean RevStock becoming part of Horizon, subject to their priorities, their vision. It would mean working for Victor Reynolds. "I need to finish getting these systems online," I said. "We can talk about the future once your clients are taken care of." "Of course," he agreed quickly. "And Maya? Thank you. Truly." After we hung up, I turned back to my code, to the problems that needed solving, to the businesses that depended on functioning inventory systems to operate. The future, partnerships, acquisitions, consulting contracts, could wait. Right now, I was doing exactly what I had built RevStock to do, making sure things worked when everything else failed. 3 days later, Horizon's engineers finally identified and fixed the core issue with their Enterprise Suite. Their clients began transitioning back to the main system, leaving RevStock as the backup it was meant to be. I had slept perhaps 10 hours total during those 3 days, sustained by adrenaline and the satisfaction of seeing my system perform exactly as designed under the most demanding conditions possible. I was finally home, showered, and contemplating the luxury of a full night's sleep when my laptop pinged with a new email. From Victor Reynolds. Subject line, proposal. I opened it with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The email was brief, professional, and contained an attached PDF. "Maya, attached is our formal offer for your services and the RevStock system. I hope you'll consider it seriously. This crisis has taught us much about what our clients truly need. I believe together we can build something that combines your stability with our scale. Victor." I clicked on the attachment. The first page displayed a number that made me blink to make sure I was seeing it correctly. $500,000. Annual. Consulting fee. With a 3-year minimum contract. Plus potential performance bonuses based on system uptime and client satisfaction. Plus stock options in Horizon Tech plus a seat on their technical advisory board. All in exchange for my expertise in building resilient systems and for keeping RevStock available as a backup solution for Horizon's enterprise clients. Not an acquisition. Not absorption into their corporate machine. A partnership that recognized the value of what I had built while allowing me to continue developing it independently. I closed the laptop without responding. I needed time to think, to weigh options, to consider what this meant for RevStock's future and my own. But as I finally lay down to sleep, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. My charming obsolete system, my digital horseshoe making, had just become worth $500,000 a year to the very man who had mocked it. Sometimes, being right was vindication enough. But being right and properly valued? That was something altogether more satisfying. The morning sun filtered through my blinds, warming my face and pulling me from the deepest sleep I'd had in months. For a moment, I lay still, savoring the sensation of rest without urgency, of waking naturally rather than to the harsh buzz of an alarm or the ping of a crisis notification. My phone lay on the nightstand, silent but full of missed calls and messages, congratulations from the few industry contacts who had already heard about Horizon's system failure and RevStock's rescue operation. Questions from potential clients who suddenly saw the value in a system that prioritized reliability over cutting-edge features, a voicemail from my mother who had seen something on the business news and wanted to know if that was my Maya there. Talking about fame, even in the niche world of enterprise inventory management, was a strange thing. 3 days ago, I was the dinosaur, the cautionary tale of someone who didn't understand where technology was heading. Now I was the prophet, the one who had seen the flaws in the emperor's clothes when everyone else was busy admiring the non-existent fabric. I made coffee, strong and black, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open to Victor's proposal. $500,000 a year. For doing exactly what I had always been doing, building systems that worked even when the shiny things failed. It would mean financial security. It would mean validation. It would mean never again having to sit in a conference room while someone like Victor Reynolds compared my life's work to a typewriter repair shop. But it would also mean tying RevStock's future to Horizon in some way, becoming the reliable backup for a system I fundamentally disagreed with. It would mean sitting in board meetings with Victor, navigating the politics of a company that had built its reputation on flash over substance. I closed the laptop again, decided to let the proposal sit for another day. There was no rush. For once, I was in the position of power. Victor needed me more than I needed him. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Winters at GlobalMart. Heard what happened with Horizon. Our offer still stands. Would love to make GlobalMart RevStock's flagship client. I smiled. Options. I had options now. Outside my window, Oakland was coming to life, people heading to work, delivery trucks navigating narrow streets, the rhythms of commerce that depended on systems like mine functioning properly, invisibly, reliably. There was something beautiful about it, about building tools that supported real work in the real world, even if they never made headlines or attracted venture capital. I typed a quick reply to Patricia, still interested. Let's set up that demo next week. Then I opened a new document and began drafting a counterproposal to Victor. If we were going to do this, we would do it on terms that respected what RevStock was and what it stood for. Not obsolete. Not charming. Essential. At first, building RevStock wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about solving a problem. That kept me awake at night. 3 years before that humiliating conference, I was working as a supply chain analyst for Medicor, a mid-sized medical supply company that struggled with inventory management during the worst of the pandemic. While other tech professionals chased the next big thing, I was in warehouses watching workers use clipboards and manual counts because the fancy cloud systems kept failing during critical moments. I remember standing in a Louisiana distribution center during a hurricane warning, watching the center manager nearly break down when the system went offline just as they needed to track emergency medical supplies. We can't just tell hospitals, sorry, the internet is down, she had said, her voice tight with frustration. People's lives depend on knowing exactly what we have and where it is. That night, in a hotel room with spotty Wi-Fi and the sound of rain hammering against the windows, I opened my laptop and started sketching what would eventually become RevStock. Not because I wanted to build a startup or attract investors, but because I couldn't stand watching one more essential business crippled by systems built by people who had never set foot in a warehouse during a crisis. The first version was ugly, a basic inventory tracking system that could run on local networks without internet connectivity, storing data locally and syncing when connections returned. I built it over weekends and late nights, testing it on my own laptop with simulated inventory data from Medicor. When I finally showed it to Sarah, the distribution center manager, she didn't care about the unpolished interface or the lack of fancy visualizations. She cared that it worked, consistently, reliably, even when the power was flickering and the internet was down. This is what we actually need, she said, scrolling through the simple grid of inventory items. Not some beautiful dashboard. That breaks when we need it most. I expanded the system slowly, methodically, adding features based on actual problems faced by real inventory managers. Barcode scanning that worked with older equipment. Reports that could be printed when digital. Displays weren't practical. Data structures that accommodated the messy reality of physical inventory, where items got misplaced, mislabeled, or damaged. 6 months in, I showed RevStock to my boss at Medicor, hoping for company support to develop it further. It's solid work, Maya, he said, leaning back in his chair. But it's not exactly cutting edge, is it? Our investors want to see us embracing AI, machine learning, predictive analytics. This system actually works when those cutting-edge solutions fail, I replied. Isn't that more important? He smiled the way adults smile at idealistic children. In a perfect world, sure. But we're trying to position ourselves as innovation leaders. This feels practical. He said, practical, the way others might say boring. In that moment, I realized that Medicor would never support RevStock, not because it didn't solve real problems, but because solving real problems wasn't flashy enough for their investor presentations. 2 weeks later, I quit my job. I cashed out my modest 401k, moved from my comfortable apartment in Chicago to a tiny studio in Oakland to reduce costs, and committed to building RevStock into a full-fledged product. Those first months were the hardest. Each morning, I woke up questioning my decision. Each night, I fell asleep wondering if I was wasting my time on a system the industry had already decided was too practical to be valuable. Silicon Valley was chasing artificial intelligence and blockchain-based inventory solutions, concepts that made for exciting pitch decks but frequently collapsed under real-world conditions. What kept me going were the weekly calls with Sarah and a growing network of inventory managers who had heard about RevStock through word of mouth. They didn't care about technology trends. They cared about receiving accurate shipments, maintaining proper stock levels, and not having to explain to customers why the computer said an item was available when it wasn't. We had another system crash yesterday, Sarah told me during one of our calls. Third time this month. Meanwhile, your pilot version hasn't hiccuped once. Small validations like these sustain me through months of solo development, through rejected loan applications and dismissive meetings with potential investors who couldn't understand why I wasn't building for the connected future. But what about when every shelf has sensors? One investor had asked, barely looking up from his phone during my pitch. What about when drones automatically scan inventory? Then RevStock will integrate with those systems, I answered. But until that future actually arrives, not just in tech demos but in every warehouse in every part of the country, businesses still need systems that work today. He declined to invest, of course. They all did. RevStock wasn't solving an imaginary future problem, it was solving a real current one. And in the world of tech investment, the imaginary future was always more appealing than the messy present. So I bootstrapped. I took on consulting work to pay the bills, coding late into the night on RevStock after finishing my paid projects. I ate ramen and peanut butter sandwiches, cut my own hair, and gave up every luxury to extend my runway. When my laptop died, I bought a refurbished one instead of the new model I wanted. When my car needed repairs I couldn't afford, I sold it and relied on public transportation. Every sacrifice was for RevStock. Not because I thought it would make me rich or famous, but because I believed in building technology that actually helped people do their jobs better. The first paying customer came 9 months after I quit Medicore, a small manufacturing company in Michigan that produced automotive parts. They had tried 3 different inventory systems, each one promising to revolutionize their operations with machine learning and predictive analytics. Each one had failed to perform basic inventory management functions reliably. We don't need a revolution, the operations manager told me during our video call. We need to know how many crankshafts we have in stock without the system crashing. Every other day, I installed RevStock on their local servers, trained their staff remotely, and held my breath as they began using it in production. The first month, I woke up every morning expecting the email telling me they had encountered a critical bug or decided to go with a competitor. Instead, I got weekly reports of smooth operations, of employees actually trusting the system, of management finally having accurate inventory data. They referred me to another small manufacturer, who referred me to another. Slowly, through word of mouth alone, RevStock gained a foothold in industries where reliability mattered more than technological fashion: medical supplies, automotive parts, industrial equipment. Never the sexy consumer brands that made headlines. Always the backbone companies that kept the economy functioning. 18 months after quitting Medicore, I had 12 paying clients and enough revenue to hire my first employee, Elena, a back-end developer who had grown equally frustrated with building flashy but fragile systems at her previous job. I'm tired of being told that reliability is boring, she said during her interview. I want to build something that actually helps people. We worked from my apartment at first, then upgraded to a small office in a converted warehouse in Oakland. No ping pong tables, no free beer on tap, none of the Silicon Valley startup trappings. Just desks, computers, and a commitment to building software that worked when everything else failed. By the 2-year mark, RevStock had grown to serve 28 clients across manufacturing, healthcare, and industrial supply. We had expanded the team to 5 people, still tiny by industry standards, but big enough to support our clients and continue development. Our revenue wasn't impressive by Silicon Valley standards, but we were profitable, debt-free, and growing steadily through client referrals alone. That's when Victor Reynolds first entered my life. Horizon Tech had just gone public with a valuation that made headlines even in non-tech news. Their enterprise suite was being hailed as the future of business operations, a fully integrated, cloud-based system that promised to connect every aspect of enterprise management, from human resources to supply chain to customer relationships. The press release announcing their expansion into inventory management landed in my inbox via a concerned email from one of our clients. Should we be looking at this instead? They asked, attaching the glossy announcement full of promises about end-to-end visibility and seamless integration and AI-powered inventory optimization. I studied Horizon's offering carefully. On paper, it was impressive: a beautiful interface, advanced analytics, the ability to track inventory across global supply chains in real time. It was everything RevStock wasn't: flashy, comprehensive, built on the latest cloud architecture. But reading between the lines, I noticed what was missing. No mention of offline capabilities. No discussion of how the system would function during network outages. No acknowledgement of the messy realities of physical inventory management in places where connectivity wasn't guaranteed. I responded to my client honestly, Horizon's system looks powerful for companies with perfect infrastructure and connectivity. If that's your situation, it might be worth exploring. But if you ever deal with network issues, remote locations, or need guaranteed uptime regardless of external factors, I'd be concerned about potential gaps. They stayed with Revstock. But the seed of worry had been planted. Horizon was $1 billion company with hundreds of engineers and a marketing budget larger than Revstock's entire annual revenue. If they decided to target our market segment seriously, could we compete? I decided we needed to understand our competition better. I registered for a Horizon Enterprise Suite webinar, watching as their polished presenters demonstrated features. That did look genuinely impressive. The analytics could predict inventory needs based on historical data. The interface was intuitive and responsive. The dashboard visualizations would make any executive happy. But during the Q&A session, I typed, "How does the system function during network outages or in locations with limited connectivity?" The presenter hesitated just briefly before answering. The system is designed for modern infrastructure with reliable connectivity. For edge cases with connectivity challenges, we recommend upgrading local network infrastructure to ensure optimal performance. In other words, if our system doesn't work for you, it's your fault for not having good enough internet. I attended 3 more webinars, asking variations of the same question each time. The answers were always similar, dismissive of the concern, placing the responsibility on the customer to ensure perfect conditions rather than on the system to adapt to reality. That's when I knew Revstock still had a place in the market. Horizon was building for an idealized world where everything worked perfectly all the time. We were building for the real world, where storms knocked out power, where remote warehouses had spotty connectivity, where people needed systems that adapted to their constraints rather than imposing new ones. I called a team meeting the next day, gathered our now 7 employees in our modest conference room. Horizon Tech is going to change the conversation around inventory management, I told them, pulling up the competitor's slick website on our projector. They'll make our approach seem outdated, conservative, maybe even obsolete. Potential clients will ask why we're not offering AI-powered predictions or real-time global tracking. Elena frowned. Should we start adding those features? Try to compete on their terms? I shook my head. That's exactly what we're not going to do. We're going to double down on what makes Revstock different: reliability, functionality under adverse conditions, and systems that work with the infrastructure our clients actually have, not what Silicon Valley thinks they should have. But will that be enough? Asked Michael, our newest developer. Horizon has resources we can't match. They also have blind spots we don't have, I replied. They're building from theory. We're building from practice. They're solving imaginary problems with perfect technology. We're solving real problems with practical technology. I stood up, feeling more certain than I had in months. Let's focus on making Revstock even more resilient, even more adaptable to difficult conditions. Let's build features that address the problems Horizon isn't even acknowledging exist. Over the next 6 months, we implemented local-first data architecture that made Revstock even more robust during connectivity issues. We added simplified mobile interfaces for warehouses where workers needed to check inventory on the go. We built in compatibility with older barcode scanners and RFID systems so clients didn't need to replace functioning hardware. None of these features were revolutionary. None would make headlines or attract venture capital. But each one solved a real problem faced by real businesses managing real inventory. During this time, Horizon continued its meteoric rise. Their stock price doubled, then tripled. They announced partnerships with major retail chains and manufacturing conglomerates. Their CEO, Victor Reynolds, became a regular on business news channels, confidently predicting a future where all business operations were seamlessly integrated through Horizon's cloud platform. Meanwhile, Revstock grew steadily if unspectacularly. We added new clients at a rate of 2 or 3 per month, mostly through referrals. Our team expanded to 12 people. We moved to a slightly larger office, still in Oakland, still without ping-pong tables. We remained profitable, debt-free, and true to our mission of building technology that worked when everything else failed. That's when the email arrived inviting me to speak at Tech Forward, one of the larger industry conferences focused on enterprise technology. The invitation surprised me. Revstock wasn't the kind of flashy startup usually featured at these events. But the organizer explained that they were including a track on resilient systems for critical operations, and several attendees had suggested Revstock as an example. I hesitated before accepting. These conferences were usually dominated by companies like Horizon, with their massive marketing budgets and armies of sales representatives. Revstock would be a small fish in a very large, very noisy pond. Would Anyone even attend my session? Would it be worth the time away from development and client support? But the opportunity to speak about the importance of resilience in critical systems was too important to pass up. Maybe, just maybe, I could shift the conversation away from features and flashiness toward reliability and real-world functionality. I spent weeks preparing my presentation, distilling 3 years of RevStock development into a clear, compelling case for systems designed to function under adverse conditions. I practiced in front of my team, refined my slides, and even invested in a new blazer for the occasion, my one concession to the unwritten dress code of tech conferences. What I didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Victor Reynolds would be there, that he would single out my presentation for mockery, that he would dismiss years of careful, thoughtful development as charming and obsolete. And I certainly couldn't have predicted that 6 months later, his magnificent, cutting-edge system would collapse completely, leaving his clients in chaos and his company's reputation in tatters. I couldn't have known that the very attributes he mocked, RevStock's ability to function offline, its local database fallbacks, its practical approach to real-world conditions, would become worth $500,000 a year to him. But perhaps I should have. Because while Silicon Valley was busy building for an imaginary future of perfect connectivity and flawless infrastructure, the real world continued to be messy, unpredictable, and in need of systems that recognized that reality. The night before the conference, I stood in my hotel room overlooking San Francisco Bay, reviewing my presentation one last time. The lights of the city sparkled below, a perfect metaphor for the tech industry itself, bright, beautiful, drawing all eyes upward, while the essential infrastructure that made it possible remained hidden below, taken for granted until it failed. Tomorrow, I told myself, I speak for the infrastructure. For the systems that don't sparkle but keep everything else working. I didn't know then how prophetic those words would be, or how completely the tables would turn. I didn't know that RevStock's journey from charmingly obsolete to essential would happen in such dramatic fashion. But I did know this, I believed in what we had built. Not because it was revolutionary or disruptive, but because it was necessary. Because it solved real problems for real people. Because it worked. And in the end, that's what technology should do. It should work. Not just in perfect conditions, not just when everything goes right, but especially when things go wrong. Especially when people need it most. That belief sustained me through 3 years of development, through rejection from investors, through the mockery of industry leaders like Victor Reynolds. And ultimately, it was that belief, not venture capital, not media attention, not industry awards, that would prove to be RevStock's greatest strength and my own personal vindication. I stared at Victor's proposal for 3 days, the number flashing in my mind like a neon sign every time I closed my eyes. $500,000 per year. Guaranteed for 3 years. $1.5 million to do what I was already doing, building reliable systems that worked when everything else failed. It would change everything for RevStock. We could hire more developers, expand our client base, finally upgrade our modest office space. I could pay myself a real salary, instead of the bare minimum I'd been subsisting on for years. But something held me back from signing immediately. It wasn't pride, I'd never been interested in proving Victor wrong just for the sake of it. It was something deeper, a nagging sense that this partnership needed to be structured carefully. Or RevStock would lose the very essence that made it valuable. On the 4th day, I called a meeting with my team. All 12 of us crowded into our small conference room, the worn whiteboard still covered with notes from our last development sprint. Horizon wants to partner with us, I said simply, projecting Victor's proposal onto the wall. They want RevStock as their backup system and me as a consultant on rebuilding their enterprise suite. The room went silent as everyone absorbed the numbers on the screen. Then came the questions, rapid fire. Does this mean we'll be acquired? Will we have to move to their headquarters? Are they just trying to eliminate a competitor? What happens to our existing clients? Valid concerns, all of them. The same ones that had kept me awake for the past 3 nights. This isn't an acquisition offer, I clarified. At least not yet. It's a partnership. RevStock remains independent, but we provide backup services for their enterprise clients and consulting on making their system more resilient. Elena, who had been with me almost from the beginning, leaned forward. And what does Victor Reynolds get out of this, besides saving face after his system crashed? He gets to tell his clients that Horizon now has the most resilient inventory management solution in the industry, the cloud-based features they want, backed by offline capabilities they need. So he's buying our credibility, Elena said flatly. I nodded. That's part of it. But he's also buying our expertise. The crash exposed fundamental flaws in how they've architected their system. They need help fixing it, and they've recognized that our approach has value. Michael, our youngest developer, looked skeptical. Will they actually listen to us? Or just use our name to reassure clients while continuing to build flashy but fragile systems? It was the question at the heart of my hesitation. Would this partnership allow us to influence Horizon's approach meaningfully, or would it simply give them cover while they continued down the same path? That's what I intend to find out, I said. I'm meeting with Victor tomorrow to discuss terms. The Horizon Tech headquarters occupied a gleaming tower in downtown San Francisco, all glass and steel and carefully curated modernism. The lobby featured a 3-story digital art installation, ever-changing patterns that probably cost more than Revstock's entire annual budget. A receptionist with perfect hair and a practiced smile directed me to an elevator that required a special key card. "Mr. Reynolds is expecting you on the executive floor," she said, handing me a visitor badge that felt unnecessarily heavy, as if weighted with the importance of its temporary bearer. The elevator rose silently, its walls digital displays showing Horizon's latest products and achievements. No mention of the system crash that had brought me here, of course. By the time I reached the 47th floor, I had been treated to a complete corporate mythology that positioned Horizon as visionary, innovative, and infallible. Victor's assistant, a poised young man in a suit that cost more than my monthly rent, led me to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. The view was spectacular, the Golden Gate Bridge in the distance, sailboats dotting the water below, fog rolling in from the Pacific. It was the kind of view meant to impress, to remind visitors of how high they had climbed. I was studying the view when Victor entered, dressed more casually than at the conference, designer jeans, a cashmere sweater, expensive sneakers that managed to look both casual and carefully chosen. "Maya," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming. The view's something, isn't it?" I shook his hand briefly. "It's impressive. One of the perks of success," he said, gesturing for me to sit at the polished conference table. "Speaking of which, I assume you've had time to review our proposal." "I have," I said, taking a seat across from him. "It's generous. But," his tone was knowing. He hadn't expected me to accept immediately. "But I have some concerns about how this partnership would work in practice." Victor nodded slowly. "I thought you might. Let me address the obvious first. This isn't a ploy to acquire Revstock and shut it down. We genuinely need what you've built." "Why?" I asked directly. "You could hire a team of engineers to replicate our offline capabilities. With your resources, you could build something similar in months." He leaned back, studying me with new respect. Most people would have avoided challenging him so directly in his own headquarters. "2 reasons," he said finally. "First, time. Our clients needed a solution yesterday. They're already questioning whether they can trust us after the outage. We can't afford months of development plus testing." I nodded. That made sense. "Second," he continued, "your system works. It's battle-tested. You've spent years refining it under real-world conditions. We could try to replicate that, but we'd inevitably miss things that you've already learned the hard way." His candor surprised me. I had expected corporate spin, not this straightforward admission that Revstock had value Horizon couldn't easily reproduce. "All right," I said. "So what exactly are you proposing? Beyond what's in the document?" Victor leaned forward. "Revstock becomes the official backup system for all Horizon Enterprise Suite clients. If our system experiences issues, theirs automatically fails over to yours. You maintain Revstock as an independent product, continue serving your existing clients, and help us rebuild the Enterprise Suite to be more resilient." "And how much input would I have on the rebuild? Would my recommendations be implemented, or just considered?" His expression turned serious. "That's why I wanted this partnership structured as a consulting arrangement, not just a technology license. I need you in the room when architectural decisions are made. Your perspective on resilience needs to be central to how we rebuild." I studied him, looking for signs of the dismissive executive who had mocked my system at the conference. Instead, I saw someone humbled by failure, someone who had recognized, painfully, publicly, that his approach had gaps that mine addressed. "What changed, Victor?" I asked quietly. 6 months ago, Revstock was a charming relic, a vinyl record in a streaming world. Now it's worth $500,000 a year to you. What really changed? Besides the crash?" He was silent for a long moment, looking out at the view that suddenly seemed less like a status symbol and more like an isolation chamber, separating him from the practical realities of the businesses his software was meant to serve. "I spent 3 days talking to clients after the system went down," he said finally. "Not PR statements or formal apologies. Real conversations about what the outage cost them. A hospital that couldn't track critical supplies. A manufacturer That had to shut down production lines. A pharmaceutical distributor that lost track of temperature-sensitive medications. He turned back to me, his expression stripped of its usual confidence. They didn't care about our AI capabilities or our beautiful dashboards or our predictive analytics. They just wanted to know where their inventory was. Basic, fundamental information that our cutting-edge system couldn't provide when it mattered most. I nodded, recognizing the same realization that had led me to create RevStock in the first place. And then, he continued, they started telling me about this other system some of their industry colleagues used. Nothing fancy, they said, but it always worked. Always. Even during hurricanes, power outages, network failures. It just worked. RevStock, I said quietly. RevStock, he confirmed. The system I'd dismissed as obsolete was exactly what my clients needed when my state-of-the-art platform failed them. The admission clearly cost him something. Victor Reynolds wasn't accustomed to acknowledging mistakes, especially not to someone he had previously dismissed. So yes, he concluded, something changed. I changed. I realized that resilience isn't just a checkbox feature, it's fundamental. And you understood that long before I did. His honesty disarmed me. I had expected to negotiate with a corporate titan reluctantly seeking a band-aid for a PR problem. Instead, I was having a genuine conversation with someone who had reconsidered his assumptions. All right, I said. I'm interested in the partnership, but I need some specific terms added to the agreement. Victor nodded. Name them. First, RevStock remains completely independent. We continue to develop our product according to our roadmap, not Horizon's priorities. Agreed. Second, I need access to Horizon's codebase and architecture. Full access, not just the parts you think need fixing. I can't help rebuild the system without understanding it completely. He hesitated. Only briefly. You'll need to sign additional NDAs, but yes. Third, any clients who switch to RevStock during the Enterprise Suite rebuild stay our clients, even after your system is back online. No pressure to migrate them back. This one made him pause longer. We can agree that they'll have the choice, with no pressure from us. But we'll still present the option once the new system is ready. Fair enough, I conceded. Fourth, I want a public acknowledgement of this partnership. Not hidden in fine print on your website, but a clear statement that Horizon is incorporating RevStock's resilience into their future systems. That might be tricky from a PR perspective, he said carefully. It could be seen as admitting the fundamental flaws in our approach. It is admitting the fundamental flaws in your approach, I replied evenly. That's the point. Your clients deserve to know that you're addressing the root causes of the failure, not just applying a quick fix. Victor studied me, perhaps reassessing whether I was a pushover grateful for his attention or a serious business partner with leverage and clear demands. All right, he said finally. We'll draft a joint press release announcing the partnership and what it means for improved resilience. And lastly, I said, I want equity. His eyebrows rose. The consulting fee isn't enough? The fee compensates me for my time and expertise. Equity aligns our interests for the long term. If my contributions help rebuild Horizon's reputation and strengthen its technology, I should benefit from that growth. Victor leaned back, a smile slowly spreading across his face. Not the practiced, charismatic smile he used in press conferences, but something more genuine, respect, perhaps. You drive a harder bargain than I expected, Maya. What percentage did you have in mind? I named a figure that was ambitious but not unreasonable. He countered with a lower one. We negotiated, finding a middle ground that satisfied us both. As we wrapped up the meeting, Victor walked me to the elevator. You know, he said, I underestimated you at that conference. I saw the plain interface, the focus on offline functionality, and dismissed it as lacking vision. A common mistake in this industry, I replied. Confusing flash for substance. He nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. When can you start? I'll need a week to prepare my team for the transition and set up workflows. But I can start reviewing your architecture documents immediately. Good, he said, extending his hand again. I look forward to working with you, Maya. As the elevator descended, I watched the digital displays cycle through Horizon's corporate messaging. Soon, those displays would include mention of RevStock, of resilience as a core value, of systems that worked when everything else failed. It wasn't validation I had sought, but it was validation nonetheless. Not from venture capitalists or tech media, but from the market itself, from businesses that needed reliable systems, from a competitor who had recognized the value in my approach, from clients who had been saved from disaster by software built with their real needs in mind. Back at RevStock's modest office, I gathered the team again to share the results of the meeting. I outlined the agreement, the added terms, the equity component, and what it would mean for our company going forward. So we're really doing this, Elena said when I finished. Partnering with the company whose CEO mocked us publicly. We are, I confirmed. Not because we need their validation, but because this partnership allows us to influence how enterprise systems are built on a scale we couldn't achieve alone. And the money doesn't hurt, Michael added with a grin. The team laughed, tension breaking. We were a practical group. We believed in building reliable systems, but we also believed in fair compensation for value created. The money doesn't hurt, I agreed. Speaking of which, everyone's getting a raise, effective immediately. Cheers erupted around the table. These people had believed in Rev stock when it was just an idea, had worked for below-market salaries because they shared my vision of technology that served real needs reliably. They deserved to share in this success. But, I added when the celebration quieted, this doesn't change who we are or what we value. We're still building for reliability first. We're still focused on solving real problems, not chasing trends. We're still Rev stock. Nods around the table. They understood. This wasn't a pivot or a sellout, it was an opportunity to expand our impact while staying true to our principles. The next morning, I arrived at the office early to prepare for the transition. As I settled at my desk, an email notification appeared, a news alert for Horizon Tech. I clicked it with some trepidation, wondering if there had been another system issue or if Victor had changed his mind about our partnership. Instead, I found an interview with Victor in a major tech publication. The headline read, Horizon CEO. Silicon Valley's obsession with innovation sometimes comes at the cost of reliability. I read the article quickly, expecting corporate doublespeak. Instead, I found Victor candidly discussing the recent system failure and what it had taught him about the importance of resilient systems. We built for the perfect scenario, he was quoted saying. But our clients operate in the real world, where connectivity isn't guaranteed and systems need to function even when conditions aren't ideal. That's why we're partnering with RevStock, a company that has prioritized reliability from day one. He went on to discuss how the partnership would strengthen Horizon's offerings while allowing RevStock to remain independent and continue serving its dedicated client base. It was more than I had expected, a public acknowledgement not just of the partnership but of the fundamental value of RevStock's approach. Not grudging or hidden in corporate jargon, but clear and direct. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Seen the article? He actually gave us credit. I replied, surprising, but welcome. Maybe he really did learn something from the crash. As I set down my phone, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From standing in that Louisiana warehouse during a hurricane warning, to quitting my job and bootstrapping RevStock, to being publicly mocked at an industry conference, to now, partnering with one of the largest enterprise software companies in the world, on terms that honored what RevStock stood for. The path hadn't been straight or easy. It had been filled with doubt, with financial struggle, with moments when it seemed like the industry's obsession with innovation at the expense of reliability would leave no room for a system like RevStock. But I had stayed true to the vision. Not because I was stubborn or resistant to new technology, but because I had seen firsthand the cost of systems that failed when people needed them most. I had built RevStock for the hospital administrators tracking vital medical supplies, for the warehouse workers scanning inventory in facilities with spotty Wi-Fi, for the businesses that couldn't afford to stop functioning just because their internet connection went down. And now, that commitment to solving real problems with practical solutions had led to a partnership that would allow RevStock's approach to influence enterprise software on a global scale. Not because I had chased trends or sought validation from the tech elite, but because reality had intervened. Because when the cutting-edge systems failed, businesses still needed to function. Because in the end, technology that works, reliably, consistently, under any conditions, is what truly matters. Victor's system had crashed, and in that crash, he had discovered what I had known all along: resilience isn't boring or outdated. Or charming. It's essential. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.